to the 1 o'clock panel session here. Let me do some introductions and then we'll get started with the session. My name is Will Sutton. I'm the Vice President of Engineering and Technology at Minnetronix Medical. We are a design, development, manufacturing firm for medical device technology based in St. Paul, Minnesota. Happy to be out here in Southern California. It's 5 degrees there this morning. Those are from the East Coast know that. We have been partnering with medical device companies for over 20 years to bring their products to market. We are in the design, development, manufacturing business. I'm very happy to be running the panel here today. We're a platinum sponsor of DeviceTalks West, and very happy to have our panelists here. Let me introduce them, and then we'll get into our session. Nitin Salunki is Vice President of Research, Development, and Technology at Medtronic Neurovascular and provides leadership to global R&D activities. He has over 20 years of direct experience in the areas of research, development, and engineering related to cardiovascular medical devices. Prior to Medtronic, Nitin held positions at Altura Medical and Cordis Corporation of Johnson & Johnson. Also, we have Shane Duffy. He's Senior Manager of Research and Development at Avanos Medical, which was formerly Halyard Health. He leads the acute pain new product development team working on the next generation of products and new platforms, including organic development and inorganic mergers and acquisitions. Prior to Avanos, Shane held positions in Medtronic and B&B SmartWorks. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Let me set the stage a little bit. Our topic for the panel is state of R&D and how major medtech players innovate. It's a pretty broad topic, and Shane and Nitin and I had some pre-discussions about exactly how we wanted to frame the discussions. And we really brought it into one area in particular. How do medtech companies keep the innovation engine moving and how they prioritize and foster innovation? So it's going to be how they innovate within a larger medtech company. I do have a request from them and from me to get a sense of who our audience is. So if I could just ask you for a show of hands. We typically have startup companies, academia, some service suppliers, and or mid-large industry companies. So show of hands, how many folks might be startups? Thank you very much. I should have expected that in this area. Academia? Thank you. And then service or suppliers? Great, thanks guys. And anyone else mid or large sized industry companies? Perfect, good cross section. Okay, that should work great for us. So, well, all right. So my opening, I think the general consideration is that innovation is sort of dead at large medical device companies, and all the incubators and startups are the ones that are innovating. We sort of have panelists here to help debunk that a little bit, and one of the ways we wanted to do that was to start out and give them a chance to talk a little bit about their organizations, how they're structured, what their capabilities and resources are, just investment within the medtech companies that they represent. And we've got many years of experience and a good insight from them, so let's get them to elaborate a little bit.
Yeah, so I think we're a little smaller. We spun out originally of Kimberly-Clark, which was about a $26 billion a year business. Today, Avanos is about $700 million in revenue. That's allowed us to become a bit more nimble. We divide our R&D teams by business unit, and each business unit is focused in a market or therapy area. We do look at a lot of adjacencies. We use organic innovation, and we incentivize our teams to do that. We also take part in M&A, and we've recently completed some transactions there, and we'll continue to complete transactions in order to grow. And we also look at open innovation, so partnering with research universities, startups, and other organizations, potentially pre-revenue organizations that have good ideas that we can help bring to market and ultimately grow the overall business.
Great. Thanks for the overview and background. So the framework of how we wanted to run this, I thought we'd run a little bit of a structured dialogue here, a little discussion back and forth on some questions that we thought would be relevant. And then we'll hopefully have an opportunity for some audience questions and a wrap-up question at the end. So let's dive into it. Appreciate the framework. One of the topics I think that is challenging for large companies that may have multiple areas of potential investment and focus is to really pick and balance the areas of research and execution. So often there's an established product lines or multiple product lines that are continuing to evolve and require demands from engineering resources and people and funding. And yet you guys have to keep the focus on investment in new. So I think that challenge is hard, particularly at a company that has a current large revenue stream already running. So the question I think to you guys, and I'll start probably with you, Shane, what model does your company use to allocate resources for research? Do you use a ratio? Do you go with a 5-year plan? Do you sort of decide as the need comes up? Just give us a background of what your model might be.
Yeah, so I'll talk about the overall structure. Essentially, our R&D investment is a percentage of revenue. So as our revenue goes up every year, the R&D investment also goes up. That's been working out pretty good for us so far. From that point on down, we're organized into 3 different business units. The business units essentially compete amongst each other to gain a percentage of the R&D investment dollars. So that keeps us all focused on innovation. And then what we look at down past that, or at a holistic level and also at a business unit level, is we look at doing a balanced portfolio. So we know there's a certain amount of money it costs all the time just to keep the lights on and keep the products that you currently have been able to be sold and manufactured and shipped to our customers. But we always want to make sure that we're also innovating for the future, and we're essentially trying to do our competitors' job and make sure we innovate ourselves out of our current marketplace and don't let our competitors do that. And so to that regard, how we structure our balanced portfolio, we have breakthrough, and we invest a certain percentage of our funds in making sure we always got breakthrough projects. A breakthrough project for us is something that could completely do one of our current businesses out of business, but it probably has something like a 1 in 10 chance of being successful. We also have platforms. The platforms are probably a lot more guaranteed for us. They're near adjacencies for us. We have line extensions and then the sustaining work that I talked about. So we keep a balance across them. The goal is to probably keep less than 30% of our resources, time and people, and also dollars in the sustaining piece, and keep about 70% of our investment across new line extensions, platforms, and breakthroughs.
Actually sounds like a pretty high ratio. I would have thought the draw of the current revenue would overwhelm that. So that either that's particularly disciplined at Avanos, or it's just maybe it's just more historical and organic the way that seems to work.
It's very disciplined, and it's gone from 70-30 the other way. So it was 70% sustaining, and we've been very disciplined about the activities that we've executed there, shoring up our supply chain, making our products more robust so we're not having any issues in the supply chain or in manufacturing, and make sure them products are good. And that then allows us to reduce that ongoing investment and really invest it on innovation, and we're very focused on making sure the dollars go there.
Great. I'll come back to you with a couple of follow-up questions I had there, Shane, but maybe Nitin, you could tell us, I know you've got to represent the entire Medtronic global scheme, but how do you think Medtronic is trying to handle that?
Yeah, there are a lot of similarities to what Shane just described in terms of the portfolio management. But other thing that happens within Medtronic is, almost the whole entire Medtronic portfolio is organized into business units, and each business unit, depending on the size, practices that innovation, research, development, and then post-commercial product support slightly differently. One of the more largest unit, which is cardiac rhythm management business, it's very structured. We have a research group, we have development group, and then we have sustenance engineering group. These are almost 3 verticals. At a vice president level, each of the vice president gets to run the research, development versus sustenance engineering. Versus if you go to very smaller business unit, which are less than, say, $500 million or $250 million, $500 million range, where those 3 verticals are somewhat, one team. And depending on the priorities in the portfolio and the financial aspect of the business, sometimes that ratio fluctuates. Sometimes you take the team, make them do the early stage research. When that work is done, then they transfer into development, and then portion of them continue with sustenance engineering. So that's where the wide spectrum within Medtronic. Other area that we get to leverage is we have our internal financing arm we call Medtronic Ventures. So Medtronic Venture is is really like a VC firm that invest outside opportunities. So for businesses like my business unit, if we pitch the idea to Medtronic Venture saying that this is the therapy space, or this is an idea, or this is a company we should consider seriously investing, then Medtronic Venture invest into that early stage company at a very early part of the fundraising, and then we get a first right of refusal. So that's one way I get to invest in organically. If I can convince the Medtronic Venture, then that funding doesn't come out of my P&L. So it becomes Medtronic Bank. I get to withdraw from Medtronic Bank, fund the research there, and once the acquisition happens, then I get to own that portfolio. So those are additional flavors to what Shane's company does.
Great, very helpful. So I think that, well, maybe still on the planning process. So it's still, only so it's not, all of you, both of you had said that there's sort of an allocation process that occurs at the beginning of the year, perhaps, but maybe it's a 5-year plan. I wasn't quite sure. Shane, you seem to say it's a mathematical 70-30, but is that just drawn at the beginning of the year, or do you? And when you said you've got divisions competing, I guess there's a certain element of who gets to decide.
I would say that the business team, so at a business unit level, we probably have a 3 to 5 year strategic plan. At an R&D level, we're probably running to an annualized plan more so, with active projects normally getting first dibs at the funds, and then new business cases coming in to take the rest of the dibs at the funds. But in reality, there's probably a quarterly reforecasting cycle that we're using in R&D, and we'll reallocate resources as needed. If there's a new area that's more attractive for us to enter, or a new opportunity has popped up on our radar, we're not scared to change our allocation of resources to make sure we capitalize on that.
Okay. Nitin, any other
Yeah,
comments?
we have obviously our 5-year strat plan.
Okay.
So we start there. That's the bigger picture. So for the 5-year, where is our growth? Which portfolio areas we have to invest more heavily? And then we also do a 6-quarter rolling business planning.
Okay.
So 6 quarters are more to guide us in terms of actual execution. The 5-year strat plan gives us overall directional guidance.
Okay. Well, thanks. So that sort of sets the foundation on where the money comes from and how that gets apportioned out. A little bit of a question about where the money gets funded. I think the question or the definition you had, Shane, was a breakthrough technology. Is a certain 70% is a breakthrough which reinvents yourself.
Well, so it's 70%, so 30% in sustaining and 70% spread across platforms, breakthroughs, and some line extensions. Yeah.
What maybe I'm after who decides and how do you step outside of your current known product lines? If you were to go into whatever may now be the hottest thing and coming out of Silicon Valley or wherever. Who decides if that's going to be an area of investment and how much?
Interestingly enough, the observation I made when I look at Medtronic different businesses, Will, is that each business is run by either the business president or the general manager of the business. And a lot of that person's personality plays a role. Some of these business president or general managers are very aggressive and willing to take more aggressive approach, i.e. go after breakthroughs more. Others are more balanced, and they do balance between incremental or adjacencies versus breakthroughs. So that's one thing I learned when I get to participate within, say, a Medtronic R&D Council, which is group of all the R&D leaders, and when we compare our notes, we notice that one of the influencing factors is what is the personality of that general manager, and his or her past experiences influencing making that decision. For example, I'm part of neurovascular business, which is homegrown here in Orange County. It started as a startup, almost 18 years ago. That got a couple of times acquired, and then now we are part of Medtronic. And our DNA is very aggressive. So we were very heavy into breakthrough technology. That's how you grow usually in the earlier stages of businesses. You don't go after incremental opportunities. You really create market or you dominate given market. And we did that, and then Now that we are reaching to a very sizable, noticeable, fastest growing business in Medtronic, now we have to be careful because the expectations are high now. We cannot afford to fumble, we cannot afford to make mistakes. And so now we are getting more balance between incremental and breakthrough versus, I will say, 5 years ago, we were super aggressive going after breakthrough.
So that would say that the bigger you are, the harder it is, and that's the challenge.
Yeah, you get more noticeable
Yeah.
slot within Medtronic portfolio.
More pressure.
More pressure.
Shane, maybe at Avanos, how does one decide, or how do they decide that it's time to try someplace outside of the core?
Sure. So I'm sure the mechanism is about the same in Medtronic. The actual behind the scenes is probably very much like being a startup in a way. You're going to go out and you're going to pitch your idea, and you're going to gain investment. For us, the investment comes from our senior leadership team. So we have an innovation investment board. They vet our business cases. We pitch to them. We tell them how much investment we want to fund a new idea, and then they authorize the product development process. We have a few different venues. So that senior leadership team will decide on all of the organic stuff, both actual real development work and also the pre-development research work that we're also doing as well, and also open innovation. So if we're going to partner with someone smaller and bring in a piece of the puzzle, a partial technology or a technology that's preclinical still, that's where all them decisions get made. And then ultimately the inorganic M&A activity happens with board approval at the right size.
Okay, great. So I think get a sense now where you might focus your time and where the money comes for that. Once a decision has been made to work on a product or a technology internally, now the question is, staying focused and staying motivated on that technology and truly innovating, if that's the goal, is breakthrough here. So let's spend a little time talking about how that occurs in a large company. I think one of the topics we were talking about is staying focused, staying incentivized, staying aligned around the amount of time and discipline it will take to work through an innovation within a big company. So let's maybe work that theme. How does maybe Avanos now incentivize and align around that technology and make sure that they're driving as effectively as they can?
I think you start at a fundamental level at each individual contributor, and so the goals of the organization, the bonus structure, everything is set up towards them goals. So if I have engineers that are working on key breakthrough projects, they're incentivized to hit the key milestones for them breakthrough projects and make it happen. And so when you look at typically project management and you got this trifecta of resources, scope, and timeline, we typically don't like to give up on the timeline. Normally what happens in a development project is your scope actually increases over time, because as you learn more about the details, there's more scope. And so the only thing left is to apply more resources. And them resources are typically in terms of investment dollars, so expense that we're going to spend externally to the organization, or internally we're going to hire more people to work on the project. And our leadership team have been very good at making sure that when we're working on a breakthrough project or a project that the organization is truly aligned behind, that we make them extra resources available and we support the project teams in moving forward.
Those extra resources might require a unique skill set or something that's not currently in the four walls. Often perhaps a breakthrough is going to need to go acquire some unique capabilities. Is that true? And is that, Shane, where you guys go and look?
So it's normally always true for us, especially when you get outside of your core comfort level of line extensions. If you're going to be in platforms or breakthroughs, it's probably something new to the organization. And it's not just going to be new to your R&D team, it's also going to be new to your quality organization, your regulatory organization, potentially even your sales and marketing organizations as well. So we do have to go and get extra talent. We typically want to have the subject matter expertise, so the core engineers and core knowledge within the team itself. And then as we need extra scale to execute on the projects, we'll go to third-party companies, we'll bring in consultants and contractors, and we'll leverage firms like Minnetronix as well to do pieces of the work for us.
So that's where you might get extra resources. Let me get over to Nitin on how Medtronic stays focused and how you stay aligned around the innovation now that you need to do it. And I think at some points, that early innovation might just be two scientists in the back lab working on it, and yet then it's quickly got to get some more support, and then it's got to get the quality resources Shane's talking about, and then it's got to, that sort of evolution can't be left, maybe it can be left to itself, but more likely it's going to really need to be focused on. How does that happen?
Yeah, and that's where the research and development team credibility plays a role, right? So it's almost like the general manager or the business unit president, he or she is investing into the business, he or she is giving you a certain budget, and now we want to give that return on the investment. So one thing we usually, at least I promote internally, is that we have to run R&D like a business. If someone puts $1 in, we have to return more than $1. Otherwise, the business unit president will have a difficulty next time making that investment. So how do we do that? First is about credibility, right? And so when we doing what we say we will do, so we define our development cycle where we freeze the concept and until the time we make regulatory submission. That part is where we have to show certain cycle time and predictability. If there are a lot of fumblings and your cycle time becomes unpredictable, that's when the business unit presidents, they get nervous about investing in R&D. In return, what do we, me as a leader, what do I negotiate with them? What I negotiate with them is, hey, you will have a consistent level of funding coming to the given business unit. Because if the funding fluctuates or if the funding gets taken away, then that's when you get trapped into the start, stop behavior, and that really frustrates the R&D team. And so me as a leader, on one side I negotiate with them that, hey, you will maintain certain level of funding for next 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, because many of my programs are PMA type programs that have longer cycle time. Some of those are 510K type programs which are shorter cycle time. So that's one side I negotiate with business president. On the other side, I make sure the Office of Program Management is running and executing the program so that we are de-risking the projects along the way, and we give that risk adjusted success rate to the business president. So we have a very methodical approach of reporting project progress on a monthly and then in a higher level at a quarterly basis. And so getting that mutual credibility is where, in the end of the day, I think the success depends. One internal thing I always promote within my team is that, hey, reach to that finish line as fast as you can so that you minimize the chance of stopping your program. If someone is nervous about his or her program, I said, factors those you can control, reach to the finish line as fast as you can so you minimize the chances of someone else coming in and stopping your program.
Or making changes as they go. Yep, that's a great idea. Well, I'm kind of struck here as both of you talk through those scenarios. It's almost like you're reporting back to VCs. You've got your projects, you've got your funding, you've got your deadlines, and if you're not doing it correctly, you're not going to get your funding, and you're not going to be able to complete the road. So it's really interesting. And yet, a big company is supposed to be a bit agnostic as to where the ideas come from, whether it's internal or whether it's an acquisition. This sort of make versus buy, go acquire a startup if it's better. I think that's a reality of where you guys work. In fact, it's a part of your portfolio planning, both of your portfolio planning. So maybe help the audience understand at what point does a company decide we're going to go at it internally, when your guys decide to do it internally, or you're going to go externally, or maybe it's do both because we want to, get all the horses in the race. So Nitin, why don't you start with that?
It really starts with the 5-year strategy. Many times our market or competitive landscape shifts very rapidly. So in that 5-year landscape period, those technologies where we have time to develop internally and put it through development cycle and approval and then commercialization, likely we take those on internally. Many times with the shifts in the competition and marketplace, we need certain products and certain technologies now that we don't have development cycle time left. Those usually then we go out and then we augment with inorganic acquisition or growth to our organic portfolio. So most of the time it's driven by time factor, because in Medtronic, the luxury is the inorganic part comes through Medtronic level investment versus organic comes through business unit. So that's other part of the incentive general manager has to balance out his his or her investment, where the organic part comes from business P&L, whereas the inorganic comes from Medtronic P&L. And so that's other ways we balance it out. But it's really, end of the day, it's about what it takes to get the strategy work for us. Whether we need that technology today or yesterday versus we have time to develop and be the player in that technology space longer term.
Is there a preference? I mean, would it be,
No, there's no
if time
really-
didn't matter, would it always be internal?
No strong preference as such. Again, it's a preference is one thing, but priority of the portfolio. So if I have my flagship product that's struggling, that I need to invest internally, organically, of course, that will take a priority. Versus if I'm going to a new therapy space where it's additional revenue stream, there we may just go and get inorganic part started.
Okay. Hey, Shane, what do you, for Avanos, how does that make versus internal versus external dynamic get resolved?
So very similar process. We essentially, the 3 to 5 year roadmap or portfolio process, we look for gaps in there, either in our current therapy space or adjacent therapy spaces, and then we decide how we're going to solve for them gaps. It may be through acquiring someone, it may be through organic development, maybe a combination of both. We probably have more dollars right now that we can leverage from the balance sheet side. So we do have quite a lot of cash on our balance sheet right now after spinning off from Halyard Health and becoming a pure play medical device. So we're looking to do a number of transactions. I think it also comes down to a level of risk. So if you're going to enter a new therapy area, you have to weigh up, do I build out a whole team that needs the skill set and knowledge of that therapy area, or can I acquire a team with the knowledge in addition to the revenue as well? And you got to weigh them up when deciding how you want to make your investment and also what time you need to get to the market in.
That makes sense. Maybe the ultimate best way to do it is both. Drive internally so you learn and know what you're looking at, and then acquire if it's complementary outside. Is that either of those going on with you guys now?
Absolutely, you have to keep your eyes open on both sides.
Particularly Medtronic probably has a lot of deep pockets to do both, but that's a great luxury if you can do it. Yeah. Okay, so then we had a number of startups in the audience, and one of the questions that seems to resonate with folks tends to be what state does a company like to see a startup technology at before there might be a partnership or an acquisition occurring? Do you guys have insight to sort of what stages that a technology needs to be at in order for it to be more compelling, or maybe it's a sliding scale?
No, I think it's a sliding scale. But again, it goes back to strategy. How desperate Medtronic is getting to get into that space. If it's a significant pain point, then we take more risk and we enter early. If it is, if we can afford to wait, of course we like to wait to get a regulatory clearance or approval, so that we know the technology is ready for clinical and then commercialization. So it comes with a cost, some burden to us, right? If you wait too long, then the quality system and documentation may not be at the Medtronic level, so it takes more efforts in we call post-acquisition integration, because now we have to redo some of the work to bring it to Medtronic quality system requirement, because the behavior indicate that the regulatory agencies treat Medtronic differently than the early stage companies. As soon as we put Medtronic name on the product, the expectation, quality, compliance, and documentation expectation go up very drastically. So if you wait a little bit longer in acquisition, then we have to redo some of the work. We call that as remediation or integration work. If you acquire earlier part of the life cycle, then we get to do some of that work and reduce that remediation burden. So there is no right or wrong answer. It's really driven by the strategic need for that technology to be part of the portfolio.
A while ago, I would have said, right after clinical data, because you haven't gotten too far, and a company hasn't gotten too far, but they've proven it. Does that still hold, or is it now all bets are off? It's different times, different.
Again, it's a case by case.
Okay.
No uniform answer.
Great. And Shane, how about for Avanos? What do you guys like to see a state of a startup before you're when you start
Again,
to partner
probably
with them?
something very similar for us. We don't have a Medtronic Ventures group. We have a business development group. And so the business development group used to be very focused on, there obviously had to be a certain level of revenue and a certain level of profitability to whatever organization we're acquiring, because we normally wanted it accretive in year 1 or year 2. So that kind of dictated or gave us boundaries on what we would acquire. I was on a team recently that defined how our open innovation strategy and framework would work and how we'd actually make decisions within the organization on open innovation. And we define that essentially as it could be a company that's pre-revenue, they could be in early stage clinical trials, and we're looking for something that has a line of sight to revenue within 3 to 5 years and can be brought to market probably within the 3-year window if they're in the clinical trials phase as well. And so there's some of the boundaries that we use and how we make them decisions.
Great. Okay. Now I'm probably going to turn a bit to some of our other audience members on the supply and support, supplier and support side of the game. Acceleration, innovation. Now that we've decided where you want to invest your dollars and how important it is to the business. Now it's, as you said, a lot about speed and success. So Minnetronix and others would feel like we have skill sets that could help in that process. How does a large company decide if they want to partner with external individuals, and when and how might that occur, and what are you looking for?
Yeah, it's very I will say codependent ecosystem here. Many times I have this dilemma going on. Sometimes I get a additional budget. Believe it or not, it happens when you have very good quarter, you get extra dollars to invest. The dollar part fluctuates or comes and goes easily. The headcount is where the difficulty starts, right? And so one of the philosophies, at least I practice, and many of my leaders, my colleagues in Medtronic, we watch for carefully, is we don't want to overshoot the runway in terms of headcounts. Because when the business fluctuates, when business becomes, has a tough quarter and we have to cut costs, you don't want to dip down to your headcounts. So that's where we have a fixed bandwidth and we have a variable bandwidth. The variable bandwidth is what comes from the supplier network or the OEM part of the world or in the services part of the world. And when I have that extra dollars, instead of I can hire extra people at that time and then get the work done. That's when I reach out to my supplier network and say, hey, you have these capability, I have these design concept. Can you take this particular concept from stage A to stage B? Or can you refine the concept, or can you de-risk this technology in these ways? And those are one mechanism where I need a supplier network readily available that I can reach out to. Other one is many times, I think Shane, you mentioned that you're working on a technology that is not really in your core competency, but it's in adjacency, and the decision has to be made. Do I acquire that competency internally by hiring a talent, or is it going to be one-time project where I don't want to build that competency internally? I rather go to one of my supplier who is much better at and stronger in that space, and I say, look, this is my design idea or requirement. Can you take the project as a turnkey project, and not only just take the idea, but you may want to even complement with your own design concepts and then develop that all the way into regulatory submission. Okay. So those are the two ends of the spectrum. A very short-term project where I have extra dollars, those became available, and I want to get some technology, work going on, or I have project where I don't have competency, but I need that competency to be borrowed or rented, and then I will go out and say, hey, this is a project, run it from concept all the way to regulatory.
Great. Shane, is that similar for Avanos? I mean, when you decide to add supplemental skill sets or support, what's the decision process?
Very much the same for us. Scalability is exactly the same. So if we want to move a little faster on a project, we'll scale and flex out to an external supplier. We do use a mixture of contractors and full-time employees as well. We probably maintain about a 25% ratio on the contractors to our full-time employees, which gives us some flexibility around shorter-term projects and very particular skill sets as well. And then the exact same thing. So if we're entering a new technology space and we need a very particular skill set, for a fixed amount of time, or we're not going to be using it after that, we'll always use an external supplier. So we actually have a framework where we've mapped out the different capabilities for the organization and already agreed amongst our leadership team, is this something that we're going to build and develop over time within the organization and foster, or is this something we're always going to outsource? And so we need very good partner relationships there, or it could be in some sort of gray area where it's kind of case dependent.
To add to that, we also do the make versus buy decision analysis. So when we are done with development, now we want to do manufacturing. Do we do manufacturing in-house, or do we outsource it? So that make versus buy decision is one of the formal exercise we usually conduct, unless it's so obvious that the new product is getting rolled out into our existing manufacturing line.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would have thought large companies would have, your supply chain leverage and global presence would say you're going to do that manufacturing in-house.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Not necessarily.
What are you looking for? And
Because many times our overhead costs are very high. So unless we have a strong reason to maintain all of the manufacturing in-house, usually the buy decision is the obvious decision, because many of the supply chain partners, your overhead costs are lower than Medtronic overhead costs.
Okay. Maybe still on the innovation part. So we're pretty good at talking through the process here of how that all occurs. I think there may still be an area we haven't, and I didn't prep you guys for it, but it's a little bit around where the spark of innovation comes from, and how do you really compete with things that may be coming out of academia or in the think tanks that are just decades ahead, perchance. Is that in your thought process, and how do you stay truly front end?
So it's definitely a mixed bag. Medtronic, at least between when I get to compare with it, Medtronic versus J&J, where I have both experiences from large companies. Medtronic is definitely very technology-driven company. From its founding days, until now, 50 years of journey, and most of the Medtronic CEO, including our current CEO, are very technology-oriented leaders, and so that helps. With that being said, innovation or that spark is not a structured process, right? You never know where the innovation comes from,
Right.
and so that's one thing we are very mindful about. That as much as we create that innovation ecosystem internally, we also understand that sometimes the innovation may happen some other places, whether it's academic, whether it's the clinical environment. Many of our physicians are very innovative, and so you have to keep your eyes and ears constantly open, and that's one thing we try to do, to be as engaged within our physician customer community, as well as some of the critical academic center, along with, of course, our internal innovation activities.
Maybe Shane, before I turn to you, we would have called that key opinion leaders. You've got them on speed dial, and they're always staying close to what their latest research is. Is that what Avanos would do, or you?
Yep. So it's a very similar process again. We have an external innovation portal, so anyone out there can submit ideas to us, and it goes through a certain process. We spend a lot of time with our customers and our key opinion leaders understanding what the problem is really in the field, and putting the right mix of people out there to understand, is there really a market and business need for it, and also is there some sort of technical solution that we can bring together. I think the early stages of innovation within an organization, it takes someone to be passionate and champion the idea through. It can be a little frustrating at the early stages, but it's kind of like a snowball. The idea slowly builds momentum. More people from a cross-functional perspective get involved with the idea, and then all of a sudden you're funding and activating projects, and now you're entering maybe adjacent spaces as well. So,
one other interesting vehicle we have internally is any Medtronic employee can request, can participate into a grant request process. It's almost similar to like NIH or NSF grant, where internally we have that grant proposal process annually, and if your grant gets selected, then you get unconditional dollars to work on your idea.
How much? Give me
It's a small
just
amount,
scale of
you know,
reference.
without disclosing the details.
Yeah.
It's a modest amount, but it does allow you to take your idea into prototyping level.
And singularly focus on that for a period of time.
Yeah.
And extra resources to
No,
work on it if
I
needed?
think there again, so you got dollars, now you have to gather similar-minded
rest.
folks who are willing to put extra efforts to do your day job while you are working on this innovation part.
Well, like all the startups
Once
anyway,
you are, and I think the part that we are trying to capitalize upon, if you are passionate about, as Shannon mentioned, about that given idea, you will put extra effort. You'll like to see that idea turn into prototyping. And so that's where these highly passionate folks will come together. They will put a joint proposal usually, and those 2 or 3 individuals jointly write a proposal, and then once they get funded, they work on it jointly. And then it's usually a year-long cycle. And if they show significant progress, likely the business unit will invest in them. So then that becomes a formal project.
Great. All right. Very good overview, guys. Thanks for that. I want to make sure we get some time in case there are some audience questions that you would have for our panelists. And I don't know if there's a microphone out there, so maybe you'll shout. Yeah, here comes one. Thank you, Sarah.
This is very interesting. Thank you so much for sharing. With medical device companies, a number of them are not only focused in on devices, but are starting to focus in on services that are related. And I was wondering if you might be able to comment on Avanos and Medtronic's approach for services that complement the product.
Do you want to take it first?
Yeah, I mean, one of our initiatives, our Medtronic CEO, Omar Ishraq, talks about is value-based healthcare. And so where he is orienting us and the medical device industry is we should move away from charging or pricing for the device to pricing for the outcome. So if you want to own the outcome, and the device just one of the pieces of that puzzle, and that's when the services comes in. For example, in our diabetes business, as much as we are selling our the glucose monitoring device as well as the insulin pump, end of the day, we are talking about, are we keeping the diabetes and the sugar level under control for the patient? So we have a large patient education portal, for example. It's almost like a call center where educated device product specialists work directly with that customer to make sure they are using the product right, they are doing the part they're supposed to do, and hence they are getting the outcome that they collectively, both themselves and the physician wants to see. So definitely the model is shifting from selling the device to charging for the outcome.
I think for Avanos, it's very similar. The acute pain business that I'm involved in is very much so about that post-surgical pain management outcome as well. And to complement that and reinforce it, we do have products in our ecosystem, our services essentially. So we do have an online portal which helps the doctors understand how the outcome of their patients are doing, how they compare to other doctors, not only in, say, their own hospital, but also who are the best in North America or other places in the world. What treatment modalities are they using with their patients, and how can they take some of them and leverage them, maybe use more common protocols or use a protocol that's working better for other doctors. So that's a type of service that we offer as part of that holistic approach. And it ultimately is all about driving better outcomes for the patients.
Yep, right here, thanks.
Hi. This question is for Medtronic. I'm CEO of a startup company, Wise IoT Solutions. I'm wondering for remote monitoring, let's say for the heart arrhythmia and these things, do you think would be part of your internal effort, or would be maybe some partner, strategic partner outside? And when you monitor, do you only monitor EKG, or you monitor other things that can give you more better decision about the state of the patient that is far away from hospital?
Yeah, so the two-phase question, right? Whether we do internally or externally, on what do we monitor? No, we again look for both sides, internally as well as externally. That's one of our largest business. Cardiac rhythm management is our largest business unit, and so we do look at both organic as well as inorganic work that is happening there. When it comes to monitoring, we are generating a large amount of data clearly in these devices. And so more recently, we started paying attention to those data, those are getting generated, and how we can make more sense out of that data, pattern recognition. Other part we are also looking at is something called Tesla model, like the Tesla cars, right? They generate a lot of data. Some of that data is getting used in your autopilot system. Other data is just getting collected by the system, and they are doing simulation. So believe it or not, every time you're driving your Tesla, it's simulating your driving conditions. So as if there is a driverless car, what will the car do in that circumstances? That's how they're modeling in the background. So we are borrowing that concept. We said, when we are getting all this data, can we run the background simulation so that the next iteration of a product, we know whether relying on data, how much reliable that data is, how much reliable that feedback mechanism will be. So we are using that data for that back-end simulation also in-house.
Other questions?
A couple more? Yeah, thanks. Plenty more.
Thanks. Whoa, that's loud. I'm involved in product creation or product development as well at a design firm, and so we often see groups come in with the enthusiasm that I'm sure your internal teams share. But what I'm curious about is there a certain amount of rigor to actually killing some of these projects if they're just not panning out? And I'm just wondering what your perspectives are on that, because I think that's just as important as deciding which ones to push forward.
Great question. Great.
I'll take it first. So I think we probably say no to a lot more ideas than we actually fund. That's a normal part of the process. You can look at our innovation process kind of like a sales funnel in a way. It has a very big mouth on the front of it, and as you go through that process, ultimately the rigor steps up, and as ultimately you go into the product development process, you exit concept and you go into actual design and development. Now the rigor, and you're locked into the organization, and you're committed to milestones and how much resources, and it's a contract, and your reputation is on the line. So leading up to that phase, they're certainly killing a lot of things, and then normally we're not killing that many things after they get into design and development, because we've already filtered them out at the front of the process. But yes, saying no is incredibly important, and so we prioritize all our projects, and we know in advance that if this project needs extra resources and we don't have any additional external resources to spend on it, or internal headcount resources, we will take them from projects down below, and we're willing to cut off or slow down or stop a project down below on our prioritization to make sure the key projects happen.
Yeah, to add to Shane's answer, it also depends on whether the project has a strategic fit. The project fits within the strategy, likely that project gets favorable response. If it is not fitting in the strategy, then usually that gets put on the back burner. But that's the same project. The strategy evolves, right? It's a dynamic situation, and so usually those passionate champions, those who can keep their ideas alive in the background, and as the strategy shifts, those ideas, those who are not attractive at that given time point, may become attractive, a year down the road or 2 years down the road. So there are a lot of examples within Medtronic where the project got killed several times before it became a blockbuster success.
I was curious about specifically when you're looking at breakthrough innovation. I think of breakthrough by how it's defined as typically something that is a brand new process or brand new technology. And so, and obviously you want to usually have the key technologies or knowledge in-house. How do you balance out finding true breakthroughs, and do you typically have to go out of house for the true breakthroughs, and how do you manage your patent portfolio and basically your intellectual property when you're a large company and yet you need to stay ahead of things with new technology or brand new process that you might not have in-house?
Yeah, so in small companies, many times, you have a technology and you're looking for application, right? That's how the smaller companies usually start with. But in Medtronic, what happens, I think, the breakthroughs are easier. The breakthrough areas are easier to identify, not from technology point of view, but unmet need. So there is a therapy space where we have a large number of patients who do not have treatment available today. So we know those parts. It's very easy to identify those, right, in our strategic planning process in large companies. Once we know those areas, then we look at, consciously, are there technological solutions emerging? Are there technology platform emerging? Those may address those large unmet need. And that when those two areas converge, you have a technology that is emerging, that can meet large percent of patient population. Those are not getting therapy today or getting suboptimal therapy. When those 2 points coincide, that's easier way to spot breakthrough.
And I think to just leverage off the rest of your question, so around IP protection and everything else. So the U.S. Patent Office is obviously first to file now. So we make sure to handle our invention disclosure process and also the filing process relatively early. We may not disclose everything to a third party until we've done some of that filing. We're normally very careful on how much information we provide to our different development partners as well. We may use multiple development partners and bring that together to reduce our risk in the early stages until we've protected the area that we're looking after, and then we're more comfortable in terms of opening up and truly allowing that to be a partnership relationship where their engineers and our engineers are working really closely together.
Maybe one more question from the audience, then we'll wrap things up. Sarah gets to pick.
There's organic innovation, there's open innovation, and then there's this third thing that's been evolving for the last 2 or 3 years, or 3 to 5 years, crowdsourcing and crowdcasting. And sometimes you end up taking that external, and sometimes you end up taking it internal, depending on what comes out. To what extent do both firms use that technique, and under what conditions do you decide to use that technique?
No, I don't think we are into that space as much, and I think part of the reason is, we are in a regulatory industry space, right? So design control or documentation of through the whole development cycle is very critical, and with that kind of rigor expected by FDA and other regulatory bodies, I don't know how viable the crowdsourcing approach will work, at least in the near-term future.
Okay, so I can tell you the opposite to that story. Is that my group was the first group in our company to use crowdsourcing. We use it right at the front end of the process, so maybe even before concept development. In our process, we can be in design controls in concept development, or we can essentially wait until design and development if we really want to. We've used it because we're branching out into new areas, which has a lot more skills, and we're not naive to the fact that we don't have all of the smartest people in our organization, and we never will. And so crowdsourcing is a nice way if we can package up a particular problem without giving away too much of what we're really trying to work on, and have lots of different people work on that. We've done that, and so there's one website called Kaggle, if you're into predictive analytics or artificial intelligence and machine learning, and we've used that platform before, and we've had thousands of people compete on our competition. And the way I looked at it and sold it to our organization was that we can take on one particular technology pathway internally and try retire that and see what happens. And we can afford to spend on one other external organization to do that. And so instead of spending maybe with a Minnetronix or someone else, what we did is we actually put it up as a crowdsourced competition. And what we expected was that we'd probably find 500 ways not to do the problem, but we'd probably also find 2 or 3 ways which would help guide us and help guide our internal team. So we kind of placed that dual bet on it, and we were successful in doing that, and we've used crowdsourcing a number of times.
Good question.
Okay, so our organization probably isn't big enough that I know in Medtronic they can do some internal crowdsourcing and have an idea stock market. At least they did when I was there.
Yep.
Our crowdsourcing is probably more external organizations, and it's amazing to see the people who are working on this. They're passionate about it. They're putting their evenings and weekends into it. They're working for big companies like GE and Medtronic and other companies. And then you get the academic researchers, and you get the the college kids, and they're all putting in ideas. And the nice thing as an organization is you're getting to leverage all that. You're getting to see and interact with them. It could be a talent source for the organization, but you're certainly, any innovation process is about retiring the things that don't work. And so if we can have other people retire a lot of them things that don't work, we can be more confident that we're going in the right direction.
Yeah, the internal crowdsourcing is very common. In fact, we organize a very large scale science and technology conference internally to Medtronic employees twice a year. Actually, now it became 3 times a year. So we organize one in the US, one in Europe, and one in Asia. And so that conference become almost like internal crowdsourcing, with all the technical community comes together, and you can present your problems, and then you have ready audience there to work on your problems.
I know we're wrapped up as they're showing us, so I just want to say thank you to the audience, and particularly thank you to the panel members. Excellent dialogue. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you.